Hello, Rajat. How are you? Thank you so much for joining with us at Business Standard and talking with us for about the upcoming opportunities that the sector is looking forward to in the Union Budget 2023.
Thanks, Shreya, for having me. I think we all look forward to the developments in next year, especially green is the talk of the town in India and globally. So policy matters are very important to all of us. So happy to be conversing with you on that.
Thank you. Let's just first start by looking back. This was in some ways a rebound for the sector post the two COVID years. Renewable energy sector, especially solar and wind projects, were hurt on several fronts because of the slowdown that happened in terms of tendering or project construction. So, how has the sector fared, especially with the last budget announcing a significant basic custom duty on imported solar equipments?
This has been a buffer year compared to what we had a couple of years back because of COVID uncertainty. So this year, I think things have again starting to take good shape for most renewable players. Uh, Sentimentally, now we hopefully think COVID is behind us. The green momentum continues, and now it is for all of us to capitalize on some of the opportunities which are either there or coming in the future. Specifically, if I talk about this year, many of the projects which were kind of stuck in constructions, either because of a policy issue, a court-related matter, or more importantly, through COVID, I think those projects have started seeing traction. If I take specifically our case, we are doing six large projects, or one of them we have kind of partially commissioned, others are now at a reasonable stage of construction. So we have been able to mobilize people, man, machinery back to our projects. So in that sense, I think this has been a good year. But I think, as you mentioned, one of the major challenges we are all facing and we continue to face is what happens post implementation of BCD, which was a step jump in cost for us. So I think there are some positive signals out there. There are contractual clauses which do protect us in some way, and government has kind of shown the willingness to engage with us to ensure that projects are put in the same economic condition as they were prior to the implementation of the BCD, as we call it. So there has been some positive movement. There are still some issues to be ironed out, and as industry, we genuinely hope that we don't see any major policy upheavals going forward. As we all know, policy certainty is one of the most important criteria for investors to continue to be interested in India.
A great point about policy uncertainty. And good you mentioned that because there is another sort of uncertainty that the sector is expecting or fearing is something up to you to tell me, is that the government is thinking to abolish reverse e-bidding. Earlier it was thought of in wind, and now even they're thinking the similar thing in solar as well. What kind of impact the sector can expect because of this step? And do you think that this is a prudent step going forward?
To be honest, Shreya, I think there is a divided house even among various players in the sector on this measure, right? In theory, if you think since government is committing long-term contracts, in a way there is an implicit government guarantees behind it. They are duty bound to get the best prices, because it's in a way has an impact on the exchequer. So in theory, e-reverse bidding, I personally think was one of the best developments we had few years back, and that actually was one of the contributors for players like us striving further to make the projects as economical as possible, and that is why you have seen such a great progress in terms of reduction of tariffs in India. But of late, especially in last 1.5 years, there is another viewpoint which is emerging, is that reverse bidding probably doesn't balance the interest from both developers and procurers point of view, because inevitably in a live paisa by paisa reverse e-bidding, which in certain cases goes for hours, there is a chance, or we have seen in certain cases, the kind of animal spirits take over, and developers in their pursuit for that last inch or last paisa for getting the contract somehow end up coming out with tariffs which then they later realize is not viable, and the projects then get stuck or get somewhere in the legal jeopardy. So the another school was that developers, since they are not able to mass regulate themselves, it is better to not incentivize them to go so aggressive, which the e-bidding does. So quite honestly, if you ask me, while the opinion within the developer community is a bit divided, our view as ACME always has been that in general the reverse bidding is good. It differentiates economical players from players who are not that economical. Though I don't think we have done our cause as developers any good by going for aggressive tariffs. So yes, divided house. We'll be happy to go back to earlier system if the government really comes out with it. But then it becomes a bit of a lottery. So then you need to be lucky in getting projects.
Rightly so. But just a quick follow-up. Don't you think that the market has matured enough? It's been 10 years since solar saw its first bidding and prices falling from what, 17 rupees per unit to 6 rupees per unit. And now we are standing, we've gone below 2 rupees now. Has the market not matured enough to stand on its own without any, I will not say policy support, but without any such measures, rather than an open market, something that is the grand plan for the electricity sector going forward?
See, I think that more than maturity, I think the width of market has really grown. What I mean by that is, when we started, let's say 7, 8 years back, there were few players, relatively few players, smaller size project, not too much of foreign investment coming in. Now, suddenly, last few years, if you see the number of players have increased, the amount of money in terms of commitment or FDIs have increased, which also means a lot of the players are actually under great deployment pressures for the capital committed to the sector, which then means in a live reverse bidding kind of a situation, you end up in prices. You give an example of sub 2 rupees. But I don't know what's happening to projects with those tariffs. Are they going to still go because it hardly leaves any cushion for people to absorb any of the macro shocks that people see? So that was the big worry in reverse bidding. I personally think reverse bidding in general is still good. There could still be mechanisms by which you can curb some of the tendencies which has crept in. And quite honestly, there should be little sympathy for developers who actually end up taking projects and not delivering it. So I don't think we as a sector can demand any more handholding than we have already got. It's a large enough sector, money flowing, and to be fair, central government especially has done fair bit of commitment, shown a fair bit of commitment in helping. So now I think we probably as a community need to get out of this tendency of running to government for every problem of ours. And in the process, if there are a few companies which don't succeed and fail, I think that's how the commercial sector works, right?
And this is something that we have now seen in the green fuel segment. Even before a policy came up, there has been a flush of investment, and from leading infrastructure players, from newer players, from companies, variety of companies which have entered into green fuels, including yourself. There is an umbrella policy missing, clearly, but given the interest from the industry, it doesn't seem like a policy is needed. What are your thoughts on that? Also, what are your expectations from the government in the upcoming budget, specifically for green fuels?
No, so Shreya, you're right. If you were to make the amount of noise in the media, print media, or electronic media on green fuels, you would almost tend to believe that that's the only place where some real action is happening, right? Especially now that the crypto has demised, it seems to be the only place where everyone wants to be. But let me use some of my insider knowledge to kind of give some of the flavor of what really is going on. Yes, in terms of interest, both in India and I would say globally, I've been in several countries over the last few weeks. The interest on green fuels, and we define that movement from electron to molecules is how parlance we use in our industry, is huge. That's what most people genuinely believe is the next big thing in terms of where the world moves. There is a solid convergence of energy transition, energy security, and now people are talking food security because green fuels also contribute to food security in terms of fertilizer. So that interest levels are very high. But where I would kind of partially reflect back the truth mirror to many of us is, yes, there are large investment commitments, large of investment, but unfortunately, the reality is real on-ground investments, whether in India or globally, are much behind the hype that you are seeing. So everyone is trying to take a position in the table or try to get a seat on the table so that they don't get missed out. But end of the day, for huge capital commitments, you need very clear light path, whether in terms of policy, whether in terms of adoption, whether in terms of green premiums, or even in terms of technology. So those are the pieces of the puzzle which I would think is still work in progress. And I personally think, we will have to scratch beyond the headlines and see what are the real things which are happening on ground. And to that effect, I would say that with all the good intentions, we continue to be awaiting the final policy directions from government. There has been some bits and pieces policies which have come out, but we are eventually waiting the final, not only the blueprint but the actual roadmap of implementation, which would then become or that would underpin our investments. And to be fair to government of India, there is no doubt on their intentions. They have had very strong industry consultation, but right now this is a topic even globally. So I was in Japan, I was in Europe, and everywhere there is still the policy evolution which is happening, which actually means some of the real implementation will continue to be pushed back till you actually get all this policy implementation. So yes, we are waiting for policy. We are all ready, especially a company like ACME, where we have started doing at least some projects on ground and trying to create a portfolio. So we hope the momentum continues, and going forward in next 2 3 years, you are the real on ground players, and we have on ground success stories to demonstrate. Coming to the related matter on what can budget do to it, see, players like us look at budget from 2 or 3 points of view. One, whether there is a continued commitment of government on this sector or not, right? Uh, because then we are checking, does it then corroborate with the other policy measures or the noises we hear from the power corridor? Because end of the day, whether there is a fisc standing behind these initiatives is very important. So 2 or 3 things we particularly look forward for from this budget is that, like PLI schemes were announced for various sectors, there is a talk of some PLI scheme to encouraging made in India, whether in terms of electrolyzer or the green hydrogen ammonia itself, whether there is a real specific time-bound provisions for it in the budget or not. This is one thing which we look forward to. Second thing which we hope will come, not sure whether it will be part of budget or a separate policy measure, is when some of the larger regulatory changes are deployed. BCD was an example. While from an intention point of view, they are good, in the end, it will still probably end up being net positive to the country. Where we would like more alignment between various ministries is what happens to projects who were in place prior to that implementation of that policy. Are they smoothly accommodated in the system? Are they properly grandfathered? This become very important because otherwise, a lot of the effort goes in getting regulatory clarity or getting into legal hurdles. So we are hoping that the policy measures are also backed by certain announcements or at least guidelines in from Ministry of Finance as well. The line ministry for us is MNRE. They have been very consistent. But at times, we would want that kind of a clear roadmap and policy clarity from the finance ministry as well. And I think no better place than to be speaking from Parliament by the finance minister itself. So that becomes the second point that we need, because that's probably one of the last missing pieces in the overall story that we have been creating on the green side. And third, which I would think is more from a capital investment point of view, which also applies to other places, the things like short-term capital tax, the level of long-term capital gain tax are something which in this world where we want to attract investments is an important deciding parameter for various investors, right? So I think if we can, in general, moderate them and bring in line with some of the other competing countries, I'm not saying developed countries, competing countries who are competing for investments in India, that I think would further improve the credentials of India. As it is, India is now usually from a foreign investor point of view among the consideration set of countries. The profile of India has in general grown, but these are few issues. If we get more policy consistency and measure from government, will only add to the momentum which has been there for some years now.
I would like to elaborate on the financing point because domestic financing has been kind of a sticking point for this new and emerging green energy sector in the country. whatever investment, a majority of the investment that has come in the sector is from the global fund houses, which obviously gives out a very positive signal for the sector. But when it comes to reliable financing or low cost financing, one has to look inwards. India has, given ambitious climate commitment targets. But when you look at the financing part of these targets, there's not much enough action happening at the domestic front. What, as an industry, are your expectations, or what are your thoughts on what the government should do so as to have a domestic financing ecosystem for these sectors? And I'm talking about the green energy sector, as you mentioned, from electron to molecule to everything under the sun.
No, I think you're absolutely right. End of the day, as they say, where is the money? Show us the money for all the commitments, right? And that's in general true for this sector as well. So one very interesting trend that we have seen, generally we used to complain that rupee financing or financing in India is much more expensive. I'm talking about debt financing in India compared to say other countries. This year, interestingly, last 6 months, we have seen a very interesting trend where actually we are facing a lot of headwinds from dollar costs for our planned international projects. So fortunately, rupee costs have also gone up, probably not as much as what the dollar costs have gone up. So there has been, in that sense, some convergence in the interest rate, though the overall level remains elevated. So we have a few, we think as industry and maybe speaking as ACME, I would think there are 3 or 4 things which can be implemented by India to increase the depth of financing, right? One, there has to be additional encouragement to bond financing. And now, fortunately, unlike 10 years back, there is some level of depth in the bond financing in India. You have seen a lot of Indian companies doing US dollar bonds, but I think there has to be an encouragement to rupee bond system that needs to be brought in, because that will give not only low cost but also long-term financing, and it kind of takes away some of the loads from the commercial banks that we rely on. So that market needs to be further encouraged. We have kind of had instruments like InvITs and REITs for some time, and I remember 7 or 8 years back we had something called IDF, infra debt financing. So those measures were there, but I somehow feel that we have not realized or unleashed the potential of those measures or not further worked upon them, which will kind of converge into a deepened bond marketing, which probably can shave off 50 to 100 basis point of interest cost. Secondly, I think while the Ministry of Power has used agencies like REC and PFCs, as specialized financing institutions, and even IRDA, but end of the day, there still needs to be a wider ecosystem where, whether it is RBI or the Ministry of Finance, where you have specialized contribution or kitty for financing green projects, like we have for financing farmers or some other priority sector. Unfortunately, green has still not received that attention. In fact, till a couple of years back, all the power projects were actually categorized with the conventional power project, and hence it actually had a negative impact on how projects were seen. So I can see that negativity is probably gone away. People want to de-hyphenate and see them, but still, I don't think banks have specific target or obligations to meet in terms of certain level of financing going towards this sector. So that policy shift has to happen. It could be either government of finance ministry giving that directive, or RBI making some policy measure. So we have not seen the level of proactiveness that we can hope for. But I hope it's a matter of time before that deepening also happens. And last one, which is I think more important, the gush of international financing still awaiting funding green projects is still high. But a lot of time they may not have the ability to directly assess projects in India or understand Indian players. So there could still be a mechanism where Government of India entity, whether this is the institutions I talked about or some of the banks, further uses the bond facilities available in international entities, which enables them to further lend in India. So that intermediation can also happen. So these are the 3 things I think which can specifically happen, because if we have to reach anywhere near the ambitious targets of 230, we need at least 5 to 10 times increase in the level of financing, even from India. And I hope 2023 kind of starts in that direction quite quickly.
You mentioned rightly that there is a huge amount of global interest and investment that wants to come into this Indian green energy sector, and there needs to be a mechanism in place. Given the geopolitical situation with the European Union, European countries facing energy crisis, and India is standing on its own, whether it be oil, coal, and we emphasizing the country emphasizing that we would continue to rely on coal, though we would have a significant investment in the renewable energy sector. How would this geopolitics play in terms of policy development vis-a-vis the green energy sector in the country?
The geopolitics has a huge impact in all sectors, but particularly on the energy sector, right? That because, as I said, it's not only about energy transition, energy security, and food security. I think that is one area where, for a change, as Indians, when we go abroad and meet players, we find ourselves in a relatively better positions. Whether so we can very easily discuss with countries in Japan or Europe. So in general, I would think there is a reasonable level of respect for India's position on this, and there is a clear acknowledgement that India will have to have its own path which needs to be charted out. Especially, now we have seen the so-called Western hypocrisy that when it came to their own backyard, when they had their trouble, they also had to go back to fossil fuels. So I think that's probably, in a way, ironically, has demonstrated and India's point in a much better way that it's not while with all the good ambitions, we still have a large population which we need to elevate to a good quality of life, and for that we need energy. So there is a better appreciation of point. In general, people would want India or Indian companies as partner. So those are the positive noises we are seeing. I don't find people very ceremonizing or preachy on the issue of coal these days, especially in the Western countries. So, but there is a legitimate expectation, I would think, from many of this country that while it may not be our obligation or we may not be duty bound as a country, but there is a legitimate expectation, almost a moral expectation out of India that we will continue to be aggressive in our adoption of the cleaner fuels. And because many believe that India is kind of the leader in the so-called third world countries or the developing nations, so they look forward to India still setting up the pace. And in that sense, I think there is a historical opportunity for us to kind of go for a balanced growth, continue to do what we are doing in terms of the renewable or accelerate it further while taking care of our energy needs. Untapped potential, I would think, Shreya, is that because of all the efforts of many years, whether it is a government or in general the companies, there is a positive momentum, and I think we Indian companies should be now looking beyond merely merely people who invite capital to invite partnerships, and then probably use those partnerships to not only support India's energy needs but maybe supply transition needs for other countries. And that's where this electron to molecule strategy becomes important, because unlike power, the molecules is something which you can export. So this is an opportunity we have, and this time we cannot afford to miss the bus, because we are not ahead of the curve globally, but we are not behind the curve as of now. So we just need to ensure that we now, as a country or as individual companies, seize on that opportunity that geopolitics are favorably disposed to us, right now.
Great. Lastly, just to conclude, what is your budget wish list? Just three salient points that you want to point out would be in your wish list for the
The
FY.
first salient point, as most of us have these days, it should not have anything major negative for us, right? So, and you would have just this sentiment from many people that it is not that we need many new positive, big handholding measures. What we generally are wary about, any new announcement which creates a level of uncertainty, and then we need clarifications, and it brings it kind of not use our energy in the right areas. So, first wish list is, now that many of the policy actions have happened, let's not come out with anything which kind of takes away from the regenerating, redeveloping momentum in the sector. So that's our first wish list. Second wish list is in terms of an absolute charter which says any policy change, either in earlier or now, which happens, kind of is never going is going to be prospective in both the letter and spirit. which actually means the parties involved, or government or the government agencies involved, need to ensure that any real change that happens for harmonization purpose, right, with other sectors, need to ensure that the investments which are already underway or committed, they don't get negatively impacted, and those are adequately grandfathered. This needs to be almost a charter that government of India needs to for our sector in specific, but in general, I would think. And the third important measure is how can government create avenues for us to get cheapest financing and potentially financing in currencies outside INR and outside USD? Because we are now seeing there is potential of bilateral trades between companies from India and other countries, which need not necessarily go through the dollar route. There, and that's an enabling infrastructure to create either through some kind of G2G mechanism under which you have lines by which we can trade in our local currencies, because dollar has, unlike in past where dollar was a calm currency taking care of a global order, geopolitics have also meant that dollar potentially has become a tool with one country. So I think at some point in time, as we move more from multilateral trades to bilateral trades, we need to look beyond just INR or dollar as a currency. And I think I know government of India have made some passing remarks on that in previous budgets, but I think that we now need to concretize into specific lines or policy measures, which will allow us to be more proactive on some of the trade issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with Business Standard. This was a great conversation, and you clarified on a lot of issues. And let's hope the budget has something good and great for the green energy sector going forward.
Thanks for this interaction, and hopefully we all look forward to a positive budget.
Yeah, thank you.